What's up, gang? So funny enough, I was actually working on what was going to be an entirely separate video topic today, and I was planning this whole video around industry plants and artists that people consider industry plants. I was going to dive into them and whatnot. Actually, if anyone still wants to see that video, let me know in the comments down below. But honestly, I think that this discussion we're about to have is similar enough, and I think it gets to a more interesting issue though. So while I was in the middle of this video, I realized that I was coming at the situation from a very artist-centric perspective. You know, I have a background in music. I argued against industry plants in favor of things like authenticity, originality, and creativity. I talked about people like ghostwriters and people that don't write their own songs and kind of like the sliding scale of artistry. But the more I went down this train of thought, the more I realized, wait a minute, does anyone even give a shit about authenticity?
I never yielded. And as you can see, I am not.
I think if you ask the average person if they cared about authenticity, they would probably say yes, right? But in a world of rapid consumerism and mass production, it's hard for anyone to really live a life that's 100% authentic. Besides, what does being authentic really mean besides someone's personal opinion? And honestly, I think that same logic could be applied on a cultural level too. Like, the more I looked up into the concept of industry plants, the more my attention was brought over to the pop industry. Obviously though, the concept of industry plants have been around since the fucking Stone Ages, but the definition has definitely changed due to the discourse surrounding the word. But if there was ever a genre full of industry plants and inauthenticity, it would be pop music. And it's so popular that no one really cares. I think this is one of hip-hop fans' biggest criticism of pop music, is that it all feels too like fabricated or corporate. And I mean, some of the biggest pop stars literally come from money or were child actors, so you know, there's some merit in that. Pop music doesn't really require the artist to be real in the same way that hip-hop just expects its artists to be quote-unquote real. I think hip-hop has always had this weird relationship to authenticity in regards to like the streets and keeping it real. For artists, it becomes a part of the brand and the believability aspect of it. So in hip-hop, I feel like we get caught up a lot in who's realer than who, you know, who got caught faking what at what time. But then another thing entirely has been happening in the background of all this. You know, as hip-hop becomes a much larger genre, the crossover demographic with pop music gets larger too, you know. And under the pop culture banner, the genres have homogenized so much that at this point it's pretty hard to see where the line stops, especially because there's a lot of new people who arrived on the scene and they can seemingly blur the lines at will, and it's pretty entertaining, to be honest. Ultimately, that pop demographic is way larger than the hip-hop demographic. So once these artists are able to hit like a mainstream demographic with like TikTok or something, it really doesn't matter how authentic or inauthentic they are. I think from the artist and label perspective, these artists that are able to cross over are much more valuable than someone that can just cover one particular niche, and the money that comes into the industry just becomes more involved in funding and overall just creating these artists. In a way, you could say that the whole music industry is kind of governed by pop music. The biggest stars in the world are not rappers, they're people like Ariana Grande and stuff like that. One of the craziest things to me of all time still is how Future has gone on record saying that he doesn't drink lean anymore. And that's just a couple years ago at this point, but the problem is he might have relapsed, I don't know. The problem is that he raps about it in his music, and you can tell that he still wants to evoke that emotion of drinking lean even though he doesn't do it anymore. It's kind of crazy because it doesn't matter what year you listen to Future to, the content of his music is still the same despite what's going on in his real life, you know? He's the lean guy, he's the lean guy. And I know it's art, you don't literally have to be doing the things you're singing or talking about, but I think that's the first level to the thinking process. A lot of us understand that as the entertainment aspect of the music industry. Everybody's playing it up to some degree. But going back to talking about authenticity, Future has sold so many records and ingratiated himself into the culture that no one is going to talk about when he's inauthentic. And in the same regard, who really cares, right? And I think that this is what most people would say if they're being honest with themselves. If the music is servable and the bass and beat are going hard as fuck, I don't think most people concern themselves with the authenticity of the music. I was gonna get into this huge section about Tekashi 6ix9ine, but like there's really not a lot I can say that hasn't been said hundreds of times. Tekashi is a prime example of faking it till you make it, but honestly, he shined a light on the industry that I don't think anyone else had. If Future is stretching the truth a little to make his song sound good, then Tekashi or Daniel rather, right, found a way to stretch his whole fucking reality, bro. This dude Daniel had the larger than life fabricated persona that caught on, and for the most part, the music was was popular enough that people didn't even question him that much. I don't even think that the average person cares about the snitching as much as they say they do. The thing I think turned most people off from him is simply the fact that he got caught lying about who he was red-handed. I might expand on Tekashi in a later video, but his whole fake it till you make it situation got blown out of proportion, and that turned off the whole hip-hop demographic to him. But ultimately, he still has his pop core fan demographic. All the suburban kids that were listening to him because it was cool to listen to are still probably gonna listen to him regardless. So in conclusion, I don't really think that people care much about authenticity as much as they say they do. I'm over here arguing in favor of things like authenticity, but the more I look into it, in the music industry, it seems like authenticity is the farthest thing from what they're looking for. Even in hip hop to a certain degree, even though they say they are, no one's really looking for authenticity because everyone is lying or exaggerating, and the label is encouraging them to do it to sell records, which is fine, mind you. At the end of the day, it's art, but then I think we can't be so pressed about authenticity when most successful artists are exaggerating. I think it's definitely like a uneven standard kind of way, like a rules for thee and not for me kind of thing. Because I've seen some artists like Lil Tecca, you know, like come out and say they are not with any of that activity that they talk about in their songs. But then we have people like Slim Jesus that we ostracize for lying in his music. So these rules are not being enforced equally, I guess. Anyways, let me know what you guys think. Should we be having the industry plant conversation at the end of the day, or is this a more interesting conversation? Whatever the verdict is, I'm hoping you guys all have a good time out there. I'm out of here.